So, Flannery O'Connor, as I said, you have Tom to blame for this, because the last time I was here, after the talk about reading fantasy literature and why that's important and everything, I offhandedly made a quip about Flannery O'Connor. And Tom said something about what a horrible writer, what a horrible story. He didn't like the story.
I didn't say she was a horrible writer. I said I couldn't understand her.
Yeah, I think it was a little more pointed than that. But anyways, I said, I'll have to come back and talk about it. So when he asked me, to come talk, and he's asked me several times to talk about G.K. Chesterton, so I need to do that sometime. I said, why not?
My wife, really, it's my wife that wants you to talk about
that.
I do too, but I mean, she really is.
Well, it would depend on what you wanted me to talk about in terms of G.K. Chesterton. I mean, a specific work or just because
whatever.
G.K. Chesterton in large is, it'd be a year's worth of talks because he's outside the Bible. He's the most quoted writer in the English language.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting.
Outside the Bible.
Yeah.
More quoted than Shakespeare, which is mind-blowing if you're aware of that. Anyways, so Flannery O'Connor. I sent you a very, very brief bio, and I'm not going to say anything more than that. Just reemphasize, a couple things. She did college in 3 years, undergraduate college in 3 years. Then she did the Masters of Fine Arts at Iowa, okay? The writers, Nirvana, so to speak. Then she went to New York for about a year, another writer's colony, okay? It was there that she came down with an illness. She was there 48, 49, 1950. She came down with an illness. She moved back south and was diagnosed with lupus. This is 1950 when she's diagnosed with lupus. Her father died of lupus in 1941. Okay? She then dies in 1964. So she gets a diagnosis. She has 14 years. In the meantime, during all this time, she's been writing. She wrote for her high school literary magazine. She wrote for a college literary magazine. She wrote and had short stories published while she was in Iowa. I don't know what they are. I am not a Flannery O'Connor scholar by any means. Her first big publication is the collection of short stories titled "A Good Man is Hard to Find." Okay, that's the title of the collection. That's published in 53. Okay. 55, she has another collection published, and then she does another in 60 or so. In the meantime, she's doing some individual things, and then she has some posthumous collections published in 70, Mystery and Manners, I think it is, and then there's another one, a collection of essays and such. So, I mean, she really dies, like Dylan Thomas, much, much too early. I mean, she dies when she's 39. She dies when she's really at the height of her powers. Okay? But in the brief time that she has, she puts out some pretty important work. And we're going to talk about A Good Man is Hard to Find. Now, I want to kind of book into this. I want to begin not with A Good Man is Hard to Find, but some comments from a couple of letters she wrote. And I included a link to the letters in the thing I sent Tom.
I sent it out.
Right, I saw that. Okay. One of the letters is addressed to a woman who, in the collection of letters, is only addressed as A. Flannery O'Connor knew who the recipient was, but we don't. The person's identity has been anonymous. Okay. And the woman writes her, and we don't have the woman's letter in the collection, in the part I sent you, but we have O'Connor's response, okay? And it's clear that the woman is taken by this religious conviction or passion, okay? And in her response, I've got the longer response that I sent you, which is this material, but I'm going to use the version that's in this textbook that I have merely because it's shorter. And she says this, and this is so important, and it's one of the things that so many secular readers have problems with quote-unquote Christian writers. Okay? I write the way I do because, not though, I'm a Catholic. Now, when I do this story to my sophomore literature students, I spend about 10 minutes just on the distinction there between though and because. But What's the difference? Why does she say because, not though? It's kind of like it's an excuse, something I want to bury. She's putting her Catholicism right out front and center. Okay, I write the way I do because, in other words, her Catholicism informs everything. Okay, this is a fact, and nothing covers it like the bald statement. However, I am a Catholic peculiarly possessed of the modern consciousness, the thing Carl Jung, describes as unhistorical, solitary, and guilty. But she doesn't go on to talk anymore about that consciousness. Okay? So let's take a moment. This letter is written in 1955. What is, in 1955, the modern consciousness? What is, for example, what are some of the dominant intellectual ideas or philosophical ideas of the day? What's the dominant philosophy? It's not Christianity.
Naturalism.
Existentialism, which is a branch of naturalism. Existentialism, okay? Kind of begun, depending upon which philosopher, you read writing about it, kind of begun by Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard, Christian existentialism, Nietzsche, nihilist existentialism. But really born out, really developed by Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, Heidegger, several others. Okay, Camus in 1942, The Myth of Sisyphus. What's the Greek myth of Sisyphus? The guy who pushes the rock up the hill, almost gets to the top, and what happens? Rolls back down. Okay, Camus turns that into a whole philosophy. All right, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Part of that philosophy is the absurdity of life. I mean, Nietzsche realized this. Life has no meaning. It is ultimately absurd. There is no reason why we exist, and there's no reason you can come up with why we exist. There is no ultimate morality. There is no system for morality. Morality is whatever you want it to be. Okay? That's a link to Derrida, by the way, and deconstruction. So, this is the consciousness. Where else do we see it? Where do we see it in culture? Well, yeah, you can say Sartre and Camus are, cultural figures. I mean, Sartre at least is writing plays and stuff. Camus writing novels that nobody reads, but still. What about plays? Well, who writes a great play in 48, 49, set in New Orleans, around a streetcar named Desire? Tennessee Williams. Okay? Williams is beginning. I mean, he's written other plays before, not very well received. But with Streetcar Named Desire, Williams, major figure on the international kind of playwriting scene. And he then writes plays for the next 15, 20 years. Okay? Well, what's one of the dominant ideas in Williams? This idea of alienation, isolation. The old AT&T commercial, reach out and touch someone. You can't. We're all in boxes. I mean, he's got plays that are literally about people in boxes, in walls, and they're trying to break through. I mean, it's Sartre's no exit. We're in a room that has no exit kind of a thing. So there's this idea of life is meaningless, okay? Life is absurd. You can't find any meaning. And it's really impossible to know anybody else. And even this idea goes back a little bit earlier. I wasn't thinking of talking about this, but what the heck. Matthew Arnold, 1859 or so, writes a relatively short poem called Dover Beach. Okay? And in that poem, you have a speaker who's talking to his girlfriend, and they're on a hotel, and they're on the English Channel. And she apparently is out, take that back, she's in bed. He apparently is out looking out the window towards the French coast. And he goes on this big, long kind of rumination about the nature of life and existence, etc. And he says, you hear the sound of the ocean coming in. Sophocles heard that sound, years ago on the Aegean Sea. And he's talking about Sophocles, there is no meaning to life. only count him out blessed when he's dead. That's how Oedipus the King ends. Okay? And Arnold essentially ends the poem saying, because there is no certitude in life, because there is no real love, because we can never really know someone, let's kind of pretend love. In other words, let's have sex. Because all around us are armies clashing in the night. And he's talking about religious, battles, so to speak. Well, faith has diminished at that point, according to Arnold. So this is an idea, okay, that rises forward. Okay, so I mentioned Tennessee Williams. In 1948, Samuel Beckett, an Irishman, writes a play in French that he then translates in 1955 into English. Anybody know what it is? Waiting for Godot. Okay? The epitome of theater of the absurd. Two guys sitting on a stage waiting for some guy named Godot to come who never comes. Often taken to mean God. Not necessarily the case, but, taken to be that. Right? This is the consciousness. It's 1953. What has been over less than 10 years? World War II. What is... My history's flagging here. Well, at the time she's writing it, Korean War is still going on. Okay? By the time she publishes the book, it's probably just ended. So, what was World War II supposed to be? Well, let me back that up. What was World War I supposed to be? War to end all wars. And less than 20 years later, we get the Second World War. Okay? 20th century was supposed to be what? Turn of the century, a publication came into existence called The Christian Century. Okay? It was supposed to be the Christian century. It was supposed to be the century where humans made so much progress that we would stop war, we would stop famine, we would stop poverty. In, less than 15 years in, you get the war to end all wars, which isn't really the war to end all wars. And then we get the second war to end all wars, which isn't really because 5 years later, Korea, This is the modern consciousness. Things are falling apart. The world is going to hell in a handbasket. As Red Sammy is going to say, okay, and as Bailey will later say, we're in a terrible predicament. Okay? So this is the modern consciousness. So, to possess this, that is to be aware of the modern consciousness, within the church is to bear a burden. The necessary burden for the conscious Catholic. It's to feel the contemporary situation at the ultimate level. Now, what does she mean by that? The conscious Catholic, notice. Not the mere card-carrying, not the nominal, I go to church, but I don't think, I don't act upon what I know. The conscious Catholic. And I think that can be extrapolated to the conscious Christian. Because there's another Christian at about the same time in 1955 who moves to Weymouth, Switzerland and starts a little group called L'Abri Fellowship. Francis Schaeffer, okay, who was very aware of the current situation. So, I think the church is the only thing that is going to make the terrible world we are coming to endurable. Endurable. The only thing that makes the church endurable, notice, she doesn't have this pie in the sky view that the church is wonderful. The only thing that makes the church endurable is that it is somehow the body of Christ. And on this we are fed. That is, the church is what gives nourishment. In what? Dire times. The church is what keeps the world going. And that's what the monks of Athos and the church fathers essentially all say. It's the prayers of the faithful that keep everything going. It seems to be a fact that you suffer as much from the church as for it, but if you believe in the divinity of Christ, big if, right? Especially in 1955, more so in 2018 than in 1955, but if you believe in the divinity of Christ, you have to cherish the world at the same time that you struggle to endure it. Notice, No Gnosticism, no Manichaeism here. The church, the world isn't bad and we merely have to overcome it. No, it has to be what? Cherished. Why? Genesis 1. God created and what? It was good. That's it. It was so good, John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word became flesh. Okay? The Word took on material form, took on matter. That's part of the world. So, she says, this may explain the lack of bitterness in the stories. That is, a lot of her stories are weird. I mean, really weird. But there's not this kind of bitterness that you have when you read somebody like, I did a whole doctoral seminar on Tennessee Williams. Right? At the time, I loved Tennessee Williams. Now, I wouldn't want to come within a 10-foot pole of most Tennessee Williams. Tennessee Williams has a lot of bitterness. The misfit is bitterness, which we'll talk about. Okay? So you have that letter where she kind of is talking about why she writes the way she does. Now, go back for a moment, or not for a moment. Go back to the beginning. A good man is hard to find. What's the title mean? Just on the bald face of it, just on the surface level. Rephrase it. It's hard to find a good man. Yeah, we could be non-gender specific. It's hard to find a good person. Okay. What does that mean? Most people are rotten SOBs. My dad was my uncle's. My dad is a paperweight. And on this paperweight is a little guy, kind of a stick figure, and he's sitting in a box. The box has one opening, okay? And the box is around him. He's sitting there, and he's kind of hunched down like this. And underneath it are the words, people are no damn good. You'd be amazed at the number of confessions I've had about that, that particular phrase. Because that's utter depravity. People are no damn good, kind of a thing. All right? A good man is hard to find. Might there be a biblical allusion in the title? Well,
there is no one righteous, not even one.
The rich young man. Matthew 19, Luke 18, or the one I pulled up, Mark 10. Good teacher, depending on the translation, good master, some of them, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus immediately stops him. Why do you call me good? Now, I think when Jesus does that, in one way, I'm not going to go too far out on this limb because I know some of you, much more biblically literate than I will, saw that limb out from under me. I think Jesus is playing with the guy. Because when he says, why do you call me good? There is none good except God alone. I think he's kind of going, well done. You
see that?
You see, exactly. So he finishes that. He goes on and says, so what must you do? You got to follow the commandments. And the guy says, I've done all these from my youth. And Jesus, seeing his problem, says, go and sell all that you have and follow me. And the guy turns away. Okay? Well, what happens after that? Jesus talks about, rich man, eye of the needle, camel eye of the needle, et cetera, et cetera. And the apostles are all like, who then can be saved? With man, this is impossible, but not with God. For with God, all things are possible. Okay? And I think this has a bearing on this short story. Peter says, yeah, well, we left everything. We followed you. It's kind of like, we're doing it, right? Right? And then what happens? Then Jesus talks about, we're going up to Jerusalem. For what purpose? Specifically, so that the Son of Man can be killed in 3 days, he will rise again. Okay? That's all there in that short passage. A good man is hard to find. I think this relates to the conversation the grandmother has with the misfit towards the end of the story. So, the grandmother didn't want to go to Florida. She wanted to visit some of her connections in East Tennessee. So, we have the grandmother, and she lives with her only son, Bailey, his wife, who's not named, the baby, who's not named, and the other two children. Wonderful, beautiful, well-raised, very well-adjusted children. June Starr and John Wesley, who are best described as brats, okay? They're getting ready to go to Florida. Why? We don't know why. Family vacation. It's before Disney, okay? And keep in mind, she's writing this in 1953. What else is this before? Eisenhower's highway program. That starts in 55, okay? So they're not taking 75. They're going down probably to 16, and then down to whatever it is on the coast, and then down, possibly, okay? So they're going down to Florida. She wants to go to East Tennessee and says, you know, they ought to see more of the world so they become broad. What does she mean, so that they become broad? Cultured, well-educated, by going to East Tennessee from Atlanta. Okay? So how narrow are they? Okay, I mean, we're talking provincial-minded, so to speak. Okay? So the little wonderful children say a few things. And the next morning, notice the grandmother is the first one in the car. She doesn't want to go to Florida, but she's the first one there. Okay? The kicker is, not that she's the first one there, that she has her big valise, and they're only going to be gone for 3 days. And she's got this big old suitcase. It's the cat. Her son doesn't want her to have the cat. She has the cat with her. Okay? So, they get in the car. Children get in the car. The mother gets in the car. The mother looks exactly like she did the day before, with the same green kerchief wrapped around with the rabbit ears, kind of. Okay? We get a note of the mileage on the odometer. Why? It's a stupid little detail. Why? It's part of the realistic nature of this story. How many people, maybe it's just Flannery O'Connor and me, or maybe it's the grandmother and me. How many people, before they get in the car for a long drive, don't look at the odometer? If they're driving, they do. Okay? So, they get in the car, the children, wonderful children, say, let's get through Georgia as fast as we can because it's an ugly, rotten state. So, they keep on driving. They get to the outskirts of Atlanta, and we're told, the grandmother says, in my time, children were more respectful of their native states, their parents and everything else. People did right then. And then she says, oh, look at the cute little pickaninny. Why? She said and pointed to a Negro child standing in the door of a shack. Wouldn't that make a picture now? She asked, and they all turn, they all look at the little Negro out of the back window. June Starr, he didn't have any breeches on. Grandmother, probably didn't have any. Little niggers in the country don't have things like we do. If I could paint, I'd paint that picture. Why? Why would she paint that picture? How does this passage begin? In my time. She's kind of looking back to this nostalgic period when the world was good and right and people did and believed and behaved and acted like they were supposed to. And that includes little naked niggers who don't have enough money to have clothes. I think, okay, I'll admit, I might be reading that into it, but I don't think so, based upon the description we've been given of the grandmother. Because what kind of person is she? Dana Carvey used to do an impersonation on Saturday Night Live, back when Saturday Night Live was watchable. The church lady. She is prim and proper, right? How did she get dressed for this drive? Like she was going to church. Why? In case they had an accident. People found her on the side of the road. They would what?
Know she was a lady.
Know she was a lady. Okay? A little bit of foreshadowing. We didn't talk about the earlier foreshadowing. Anyways, she'd like to paint this picture. So, they keep driving. They pass a cotton field with 5 or 6 graves fenced in the middle. More foreshadowing. How many people are in the family? 6. Okay. John Wesley asks, where's the plantation? She jokes, gone with the wind, etc., etc. Children start screaming. Okay. She tells them about being courted by a man in her youth, etc. And they stop at the tower for barbecue. And we meet Red Sammy and his wife. Okay. And Red Sammy comes in. He's been working on a car. He comes in and says, you can't win. These days, you don't know who to trust. People certainly are not nice like they used to be. The grandmother, again, she's thinking back to what? The good old days. Okay? 2 fellers came in here last week, driving a Chrysler, beat up old car, but it's a good one. These boys looked all right to me. Said they worked at the mill. You know, I let them fellers charge the gas they bought. Now, when I do this with my students, they're all thinking, what's so big about that, you know? You put your debit card in the thing. And it's amazing teaching modern students. Why did I do that? Because you're a good man. Well, the title says a good man is hard to find. Do you expect to find it in Red Sammy Butts? His wife comes in, and she says, it isn't a soul in this green world of God's that you can trust. But didn't Red Sammy's actions show that that's not true? He trusted them. That shows what about Red Sammy? He's trustworthy. Okay? Yeah, the guys weren't trustworthy because they apparently never came back and paid him for the gas they charged. Okay? So, Red Sammy gives us the title of the short story. A good man is hard to find. Everything is getting terrible. Notice, he doesn't say everything is terrible. Everything is getting terrible. Everything is falling apart. Again, there is a golden age period before the fall. And I don't mean the Genesis fall. I mean this general notion of a perfect time. Okay? But now it's all getting worse. I remember the day you could go off and leave your screen door. And it says in 1953 she writes this. Okay? That you could keep your screen door unlatched. Not no more. He and the grandmother discussed better times. They discussed better times in the context of saying, what about their time? Who's to blame? We haven't really changed much, have we? Some damn foreigners. It's Europe. Why? Reparations. Rebuilding Europe. The Europeans want America to come rebuild everything. Okay? So they drive off again. Grandmother took cat naps, wakes up every few minutes. Outside of Toomsboro, she woke up and remembers an old plantation. And she tells the children the story of this old plantation before the Civil War. And the plantation had a secret panel with silver hidden in it. And she says, I think we're nearby. In fact, I think it was on that road we went by just about a mile or so back. And the kids start beating on their father to turn around. I mean, John Wesley's kicking the back of the seat, so his father's getting kidney punches. The daughter screaming in the mother's ear. What does this tell us about Bailey? What does he do, first of all?
Tells everybody to shut up.
And then turns around. This is when I usually, in my classes, I launch into my parenting spiel. Don't be a father like this.
But he says, this is the only time we're going to do it.
This is the only time. Yeah, exactly.
Well, he was right.
Well, yeah, more foreshadowing. Children, this is why you don't berate your father on the road, because you might get off the road and, meet the misfit. Anyways, so he says, I'll do it. So they go back on the dirt road. The grandmother says, It's not much farther. And as soon as she says that, she remembers, oops, that was in Tennessee. That wasn't in Georgia. And she jumps, and she knocks the suitcase off the cat. The cat jumps out of the basket, launches onto Bailey's neck with all four legs. So he's now got cat claws, and Bailey crashes the car. Notice what happens. Children are thrown to the floor. Unfortunately, not out the window. The mother, however, clutching the baby, is thrown out the door onto the ground. And we discover very shortly she has a broken shoulder. Okay? The old lady is thrown into the front seat, and she's under the dash. Car turns over once, lands right side up, but it's in a gulch off the side of the road. Bailey's in the driver's seat, and the cat is still on his neck. What's he do? He takes the cat off. Does he throw the cat out the window? Yes, he does. Does he just throw the cat out the window? He throws the cat against a tree. Cat's not moving. He gets out of the car. He looks for the children's mother. Baby screaming. She only had a cut down her face and a broken shoulder. Okay? But nobody else is hurt. June Star. But nobody's killed. Looking at Grandma. Wonderful child. And the mother says, maybe a car will come by. The grandmother, I believe I've injured an organ. She's trying to get some sympathy. And then we get this description. The road's about 10 feet above, and they could see only the tops of the trees on the other side of it. Behind the ditch they were sitting in, there were more woods, tall, dark, and deep. Okay? So, they're in a gulch. They're down here. Road's up here. Woods over here. Looking up here, they can't see the road. They see mountaintops on the other side over here. Over here, they see the woods. Looking up, see what you would obviously see looking up, the sky. And then they see a car on the mountain that they can see in the distance, going along the road. And it comes up next to them, and it's a hearse. 3 men in it. Man comes out, silvery hair, glasses, looks intellectual, has a gun. The two boys have guns. John Wesley, just wonderful, well-behaved child. What you got that gun for? What you gonna do with that gun? And the man says, would you mind calling those children to sit down by you? He says to John Wesley and June Starr's mother, children make me nervous. What you telling us what to do for? Behind them, the line of woods gaped like a dark, open mouth. Usually, if something is described as a dark, open mouth, what does that imply it's about to do? It's going to swallow. Bailey, look here now. We're in a predicament. Really? The grandmother, you're the misfit. I recognize you at once. And he says, yes, but it would be better if you hadn't recognized me. And Bailey just turns to his mother and just lets loose a stream, apparently of obscenities. Because whatever he said, it shocked even the children. And she begins to cry, and the misfit says, lady, don't you get upset. Sometimes a man says things he don't mean. I don't reckon he meant to talk to you. I kind of think he did. How long do you think Bailey's been waiting to just let her have it? Okay, I ask again, describe Bailey. What kind of man is he? Why? I mean, I agree, he is weak, but why?
Well, look at his mom.
Doesn't make it
She doesn't encourage a lot of strengthening. She's kind of a terrible human.
Okay. Imagine Bailey as a boy. What kind of boy would he be?
A mama's boy.
A mama's boy. He's never stood up for himself. Okay? And this is the one time he's starting to think, oh, no, we're really, and she goes and spills, because he doesn't finish. We're in, he knows who the misfit is. Okay? And I think it's implied, even though he doesn't finish it. He's going to, it's not an misfit, Mary, don't say it. And she, I know you're a good man, she says to the misfit. Now, what have we read about the misfit? Back at the early part of the story. She says, right in when it opens, look here and see what it says about this man. He's loose from the federal pen. The guy's committed murders and such. He signs his kills. Okay? He's going to tell us. I know you're a good man. Really? How? You don't look a bit like you have common blood. What does she mean by common? Low. Okay. If she's talking about others that's having common blood, what is she saying about herself? I'm of a higher status. This is the Dana Carvey church lady idea. She looks down on others. Okay? She's the only one, other than the misfit, in the entire story who talks about God, Jesus, religion, prayer. She's the representative, flawed as she is, of the church. Pretty flawed representative, right? I know you're a good man. You don't look a bit like you have common blood. That's her definition of a good man. Not being common or low. I know you must come from nice people. Describe nice people. You might not want to do it, but I bet every person in this room has an image of a quote-unquote, and I don't mean an image of somebody that you actually really like or look up to, but an image of somebody who would say about themselves or think about, yeah, I'm a good person. I go to church, I do this, okay? Yes, some finest people in the world. And he goes on, he talks about his parents in a moment. First he says, they make me nervous, talking about the family. He looks at the six of them. Ain't a cloud. What does there not being a cloud in the sky have to do with anything? Okay, if there's not a cloud in the sky, what color is the sky? Blue. Okay, so they start on the road. They go down. Now when they look up, they see blue. Any symbolism? Let it sit. So, the grandmother says, you shouldn't call yourself the misfit. I know you're a good man at heart. Really? She knows that on the basis of, why is she saying this? She wants to live. Okay? Baby, hush. Hush, everybody shut up and let me handle this. Notice, as he says this, he's squatting in the position of a runner about to sprint forward. Now, is he about to sprint forward? Like, can't remember his first name, Shaw at the Waffle House in Nashville. He's going to take out the shooter? I don't think so. I think Bailey's thinking, if I can get free. Hiram says, it'll take a while to fix the car. He says, okay. You and Bobby Lee get him and that little boy. You go off to those woods. Boys want to ask you something, he says to Bailey. Would you mind stepping back in them woods there with them? Bailey, we're in a terrible predicament. Yep, they are. What's the terrible predicament they're in? Literally. Life and death. Death within seconds. Okay? This ties back to the discussion about existentialism, which we'll talk about in a moment. Nobody realizes what this is. I think the misfit and Bobby Lee and Hiram have a pretty good idea. I don't think June Star or John Wesley necessarily do. I think the grandmother does. I think Mom probably does. I think Bailey, for the first time in his life, is kind of, he's having an epiphany of sorts. Not a literal one, but, an eye-opening experience. So Hiram helps Bailey up as if he were assisting an old man. Why? I don't think it's because Bailey's, planting himself on the ground. I think it's because Bailey's lost all will. And he's just kind of, come on, come with me. John Wesley, notice, catches hold of his father's hand. Have we seen anywhere else in the short story any expression of love between them? Especially between the two older children and the parents. No. Between the two older children and anybody. No. This is. So, they go off towards the woods. And what does Bailey do? Does he give his wife a kiss? I'll be back, Mama! Be back in a minute. Wait on me. Now, this isn't Ronald Reagan talking to Nancy, calling her mommy. This is Bailey speaking to his mother. The wife, be damned. Come back this instant. Bailey boy. She turns to the misfit. I know you're a good man. You're not a bit common. No, I ain't. No, I ain't what? No, I ain't a bit common, or no, I ain't a good man. Yes, it's both. But I ain't the worst in the world neither. Right? This is 1953. Worst in the world was 8 years ago. Depending upon your politics, some would say the worst in the world was 10 years ago, as I have students frequently point out. My daddy said I was a different breed of dog. Daddy said it's some that can live their whole life out without asking about it. What's the it? Life? Might be. And it's others has to know why it is. And this boy's one of the ladders. I think the it in both cases. Why am I here? Why do we exist? What's the point? What's the purpose? The existentialist essentially said, there is no point, there is no purpose, you have to make your existence real. You have to authenticate your existence. Okay? You can do it in a variety of ways, but you have to act. You have to do something. Otherwise, you are, as Thoreau said, like the mass of common humanity, walking around asleep. That's why Thoreau said towards the end of Walden. I think it's toward the end of Walden. He went off to the woods to do what? To live life deliberately, so that when he was on his deathbed, he would know he sucked the marrow out of life. He got everything he could out of it. Okay? The misfit says, Daddy said, I would always be, what's the language we would use today? Push the envelope. Rustle things up. Make problems. Why? To let everybody know I am here. Why do people do graffiti? Why can you go to the Church of Hagia Sophia in Istanbul today and see Viking runes? Because Viking soldiers who were guards said essentially, Lars was here as a memorial. Okay? He's going to be into everything. And then he apologizes. Sorry, ladies, I don't have a shirt on. The rest of these clothes we borrowed from some folks. Yeah. Grandmother, that's all right. Maybe Bailey has an extra shirt in his suitcase. He says, oh, look. The children's mother screams, where are they taking him? Because so far, nothing's happened to Bailey, right? Just gone off to the woods. Misfit starts talking about his father. Says, he never got in trouble with the authorities. Grandmother, you could be honest if you tried. Think how wonderful it would be to settle down, live a comfortable life. That is, even after being Charles Manson You could marry, have children, have a wonderful life. The misfit. You ask them, somebody's always after you. Grandmother, do you ever pray? Really? Is this the time to bring up prayer? No. The old lady's head jerks around. She could hear the wind move through the treetops like a long, satisfied in-suck of breath. What has the woods just done? They just claimed to. Bailey boy! He says I was a gospel singer for lunch and talks about what he's done in his life. Pray, 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 pray. Is she telling him to pray, or is she trying to pray? Because some critics read that as she's saying to the misfit, you need to pray, you need to get down on your knees, and Jesus will heal you. I don't think so. I think she's trying to convince herself. Never was a bad boy, remember? Somewhere along the line, he says, I done something wrong. Got sent to the penitentiary, buried alive. Well, that's when you should have started to pray. And notice what he says. She asks, what'd you do to get sent to the penitentiary for the first time? He doesn't answer that part. He said, he got to the penitentiary. And you turn to the right, it was a wall. Turn to the left, it was a wall. Look up, it was a ceiling. Look down, it was a floor. What's he mean? He was in a box. Was he literally in a box? No. This is where I think, again, the dominant ideology of the day is entering. Because according to those existential theorists, this is life. We're all in a prison. We're just too stupid to know it. It's only when you accept the prison of your life that you can break out of it. And by breaking out of it, that's how you authenticate your existence. It doesn't mean that your life's going to have any necessarily additional meaning. It doesn't mean you're going to die and go off somewhere, because there is no somewhere to go to. It just means you've done something with your life. You've validated your existence. You've said, I'm more than just a product of chance and time in atoms. Maybe they put you in by mistake. No. He says, no mistake. They had the papers on me. You must have stolen. No, nothing I wanted. Nothing I wanted. Okay? Says the head doctor says, I what? That I killed my daddy. Oedipus complex. He said, but I know what that was like. His daddy died in 1918. Died of the flu. Okay? Well, if you would pray, Jesus would help you. That's right. What? Altar call, man. I'm going to get him down there. Well, then why don't you pray? I don't want no help. I'm doing all right by myself. Now, just let that sink in. He's doing all right by himself. How? By murdering, by raping, by doing whatever he damn well pleases. By living according to his own code. Kind of the Nietzschean Ubermensch, the Overman, the Superman. You know, if you've read, here's what I'd like to talk about sometime, after we read it, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. It's Raskolnikov. Okay? I'm doing all right by myself. Bobby Lee and Hiram come back in with Bobby Lee dragging a yellow shirt with blue parrots on it. I imagine he had him open it up before he shot him so that there wouldn't be a couple holes in it. So he puts the shirt on. Now, some critics read kind of from here on out that when the grandmother looks at the misfit, she sees Bailey because he's wearing Bailey's shirt. Not that she literally sees him, but that she confuses him in her mind kind of for Bailey. And they do that because of what she's going to say towards the end of the story. No, lady, I found out the crime don't matter. You can do one thing or you can do another. Kill a man or take a tire off his car. Okay, what does he mean by take a tire off his car? Is he talking about, inner city Detroit or something where you're stripping somebody's? No. He's talking about helping somebody who's broken down. So you can kill someone or you can help someone. Doesn't matter. Because sooner or later you're going to forget what it was you done and just be punished for it. What's he/O'Connor really getting at? It's the problem of evil. Why do good people suffer? And why don't evil people always get what they deserve? Why do good people sometimes die young and bad people, Castro, live to smoke cigars every day till he's in his late 80s and not, die when he's 25. Think of the number of people who would have lived if Castro had died when he was 25. Or Hitler, or, take your pick. Children's mother had begun to make heaving noises, as if she couldn't get her breath. Why? Well, where's Bailey? And he says, lady, would you and that little girl like to step off yonder with Bobby Lee and Hiram and join your husband? Notice, when he speaks to the grandmother and to Bailey's wife, he addresses them with manners. He is a courteous killer. And she says, yes, thank you. Rather than staying here. So Hiram helps her up. Bobby Lee tries to grab June Star's hands. She calls him a pig. He blushes. I'm surprised he doesn't just, shoot her right then and there. All alone with the misfit, the grandmother found out she had lost her voice. Not a cloud in the sky nor any sun. This is like the third time we've been told. Okay? The sun's up, but you can't see it. So the sky overhead is blue. And over here you've kind of got green. And over here you got the side of the road. Which, being Georgia, it's probably red clay. Nothing around her but wood. She wanted to tell him that he must pray. She can't. Finally, she found herself saying, Jesus, Jesus. Meaning, Jesus will help you. But the way she was saying it, it sounded as if she might be cursing. Yes'm. Jesus throwing everything off balance. It was the same case with him as with me, except he hadn't committed any crime. They could prove I'd committed one because they had the paper on me. Of course, they never shown me my papers. In other words, I haven't gotten what Othello calls the ocular proof. I haven't seen it with my own eyes, what they said I did. And he never describes who the they are. He never says it's the state. It's just the authorities. They. He goes on. That's why I sign myself now. I said long ago, get your signature and sign everything you do and keep a copy of it. Then you'll know what you've done and you can hold up the crime to the punishment and see, do they match? And in the end, you'll have something to prove you ain't been treated right. I call myself the misfit. Why? Because I can't make out what all I done wrong fit what all I gone through in punishment. What does he mean, gone through in punishment? Does he mean simply what he endured in the state pen? I don't think so. I think he's talking about this, life. He's saying life isn't fair. And I don't understand why my life is the way it is and somebody else's is different. They hear a scream. Pow! Does it seem right to you, lady, one is punished a heap and another ain't punished at all? Notice, before we hear another couple of shots. So one person's been shot, and he asks that question. Does it seem right to you, lady, one is punished a heap, another ain't punished at all? Jesus, you got nice blood. Excuse me, you got good blood. I know you wouldn't shoot a lady. I know you come from nice people. Pray, Jesus, you ought not to shoot a lady. I'll give you all the money I've got. Who does she mean by a lady? Because there's one off in the woods. Your grandma doesn't seem too concerned about that one. I'll give you all the money I've got. Never was a body that gave the undertaker a tip. In other words, it's already mine. Two more reports. Baby boy, baby boy. And look at the misfit's response. Notice, he's biblically literate. Because he takes her, baby boy, to be what? She's like Jesus calling forth Lazarus. That's why he says, Jesus is the only one that ever raised the dead. In other words, you can call Bailey all you want, he ain't coming back. And he shouldn't have done it. He thrown everything off balance. And if you're a believing Christian, that's pretty much right, isn't it? You raise somebody from the dead, and what does that kind of do to our normal understanding of how human life goes? It's like, what? It's not supposed to happen that way. You die, you get buried, you go away. Not you bring them back after 4 days and they're smelly. And if he did what, notice big conditional there, if he did what he said, then it's nothing for you to do but throw away everything. Sound? I don't think I've done anything to it.
You're out of batteries.
Ah,
Take a break.
take a break. That's okay. Good pause there, Ed.
Says,
If it works, we put that on.
Okay. That's where we're at. So he said, if he did what he said, then it's nothing for you to do but throw everything away and follow him. And if he didn't, then it's nothing for you to do but enjoy the few minutes you got left the best way you can. So, if what he did was true, you got to follow him. This is kind of like what C.S. Lewis essentially says in Mere Christianity. You know, either Jesus is the Son of God and you got to do what he says, or he's crazy. Okay? So, if he did what he said he did, you got to follow him. If he didn't, then nothing for you to do but enjoy the few minutes you got left the best way you can. And how does he describe that? By killing somebody, or burning down his house, or doing some other meanness to him. Why not doing something good? Why not doing something nice, or helpful, or noble, or courageous? Because that's not the nature of humanity. I think, could be wrong. I think that's what O'Connor would say. That's not the nature of fallen humanity. It's hard to be virtuous. It's easy to be rotten. That's why Lewis said it was easy to write Screwtape Letters. All he had to do was let the inner devil out. No pleasure but meanness. And his voice had almost become a snarl. And she says, maybe he didn't raise the dead. Whoa! He's calling into question, or he's caused her to call into question, apparently, everything she believes. Because she's the one been going, Jesus, Jesus, just pray. Jesus, help you. Maybe he didn't raise the dead. Not knowing what she was saying and feeling so dizzy, she sank down in the ditch with her legs twisted under her. Not knowing what she is saying. Why? She's never been confronted with a terrible situation. She's never been confronted with this kind of possibility. Does this mean that we all have to be confronted with this kind of possibility? We've all got to meet our own misfit? Or is it more likely we've got to confront our own mortality? She's never thought about it. I wasn't there, so I can't say he didn't. Notice the misfit isn't saying Jesus didn't raise Lazarus from the dead. What's he saying? I wasn't there. Don't have the papers on it. But by saying he wasn't there, who else? Have to be careful here. Don't get struck by lightning. Who else might he kind of sound like? Doubting Thomas. You know, the disciples are all together. Thomas, we saw Jesus. Yeah. Unless I put my finger through the hole in his hand, my hand in his side, he says what? I cannot believe? No, I will not. I choose not to. A week later, Jesus is there, taps him on the shoulder. Come on. And Thomas says, my Lord, my God. And Jesus says, blessed are you, for you have seen and believed, but more blessed are those who haven't seen and believed. Okay? The misfit hasn't seen, and he doesn't believe. I wish I'd have been there, he said, hitting the ground with his fist. His hitting the ground with his fist, this is telling us a lot about him. This is what motivates him. He doesn't.
What possibility is still in sports?
Siri does it all the time in class. He doesn't have proof. He wants proof. He's like so much of our modern society. Show me the proof that God exists and I'll believe. Well, that's like showing me the proof that 2 + 2 = 4 and I'll believe it. There's no belief involved. Okay? It ain't right. I wasn't there. Because if I had have been there, I would have known. She's introducing the distinction between belief and knowledge, which is another branch of philosophy, epistemology. Okay? How do we know what we know? One argument is empiricism. You see it. You hear it. You taste it. You touch it. You evaluate it. Okay? Prove love. Show me, like in an objective, verifiable way, love. You can't. You can't say, oh, it's a mother cradling a child. No, that could just be natural instinct. That's not necessarily love. Okay? So, if I would have been there, I would have known. Listen, lady, he said in a high voice. If I had been there, I would have known, and what? I wouldn't be like I am now. He's kind of saying, I don't like how I am now, but I don't have proof. I need proof to change. What would proof be? Gideon's fleece? He's asking for, again, what a lot of people say, I need a sign. Skywrite, Jesus loves the misfit in the sky, and that would be enough for him. His voice seemed about to crack. Why? He has just buried his soul. It's kind of like, I want to believe. I really, really, really want to believe. But I can't. I'll tell you about another author in a minute. His voice seemed about to crack, and the grandmother's head cleared for an instant. And I think when it says, when O'Connor writes, her head cleared for an instant, she means cleared. For the first time in the entire story, she is seeing clearly. She saw the man's face twisted close to her own. Why is his face twisted? Anger? No. It's pain. This is pain. This is what O'Connor called being aware of the modern consciousness. This is being aware of the meaninglessness of life. It's, I tell my students, and I always preface it with a little warning. I say, if I weren't a Christian, the only other option to me is nihilism. And the only logical result of nihilism is to put a bullet in your brain. But I always preface that with, don't do this. Please. If you come talk to me, I'll put you in contact. I'll talk, don't. But for myself, there's only two options. It's either completely meaningless and nothing, or it is the exact opposite. Okay? She saw the man's face twisted close to her own as if he were going to cry, and she murmured, "Why, you're one of my babies." What does she mean? See, a lot of critics read that, "You're one of my babies." She sees Bailey. But Bailey is her only child. So one of my babies doesn't make sense. Okay, so if he's one of her babies, then what is she? Is she his mother? No. Louder?
Is she Jesus?
Is she Jesus? Don't think so. Close? Yes. I think O'Connor uses her as a symbol of the church. Why? Is the church perfect here with flawed people? No. And what is the church often? The church broadly configured. I'm not talking Reformed, Catholic, Orthodox, Baptist, whatever. Broadly, all Christians under a big umbrella. Big inclusive umbrella. Okay? What is the church? How does the church often, not always, often behave? Or at the very least, how is it caricatured in the secular worldview?
High and mighty.
Church lady. Parody doesn't work unless it has material to work with. That's why Dana Carvey was so successful. Because there were far too many people like that. Okay? And when she says, "You're one of my babies. You're one of my own children," she does what? She reaches out and touches him it's the only time. It's the only time he has contact, physical contact. The walls, broken down. She has just literally done the AT&T commercial. Okay? Showing you're not alone, you're not isolated, you're not alienated. You are connected to me. We have I hate to use this term because, in my opinion, Orthodox priests use it too much. We are in a relationship, which can be overblown. Yeah, kind of. And what does he do? He empties the clip in her, man. I mean, he just wastes her. Why? Bobby Lee says, boy, she was a talker. She would have been a good woman. Good man is hard to find. She would have been, notice, he doesn't say she was. She would have been a good woman if it had been somebody there to shoot her every minute of her life. Why? What did that being there to shoot her do to her? Challenged her. What else?
Clarity.
Gave her clarity. How?
She was mortal.
Okay, she was mortal. How else?
It's a humbling, very humbling.
Shut her up.
Okay, it did shut her up, but it also opened her up. for the first time in her life. Do you think she ever, based upon what we see in the rest of the story, meaning the previous portion, does she ever have this kind of experience with Bailey? No. Grandchildren? No. Daughter-in-law? No. Baby? Maybe. She takes the baby in the back seat and bounces the baby on her knee. Okay? But the baby at that point is kind of, we won't get into the theological issues, but kind of innocent. The baby hasn't grown up to be John Wesley or June Star. Snotty little brats that they are. Okay? So when he says, if there had been somebody there to kill her every day, every moment of her life, he is saying she would have done what? She would have lived every moment of her life how she lived the last moment of her life. And what did she finally show? Compassion, love, empathy. She wasn't thinking about herself. It's the only time. Everything else, it's about herself. This is the one time she doesn't think of herself. She has done what the rich young ruler was told to do. She has given everything else away and followed Christ. How? How does the other rich young guy who comes to Jesus and asks him, what must I do to get eternal life? And Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan. Just before that, we're told about what? What are the two commandments? The two greatest commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Well, who's my neighbor? Well, now that you mention it, let me tell you a story. And he tells the story of the Good Samaritan. Okay? She has done in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, what the Good Samaritan does. How? Does she have time to take the misfit to the tavern? To bind up his wounds? No. She does have time to console him. To say, you're one of my babies. You belong to me. So why does he kill her? That's the proof. That's the proof. Jesus did what he said he did. How is that the proof? How could she have done that if he hadn't? In terms of what Jesus, I don't mean in terms of raising Lazarus from the dead. I mean in terms of doing what Jesus said to do. This is the will of the Father. You do the works I do. What did he do? Died. Became the broken body, shed blood for the life of the world. Does she become the broken body and shed blood for the life of the world? No, but she does break herself. Herself is shattered when she gets that clarity. Because what has herself been composed of up until that point? Herself. Keep going now. Why was she so concerned about what people would think of her if they saw her lying on the side of a road? Okay.
Appearances.
Bingo!
Her image of herself.
Her image. Her self-created mask. The mask falls off. Right there. It's the only time. That's why he says, if there had been somebody there to shoot her every moment of her life, she'd have been a good woman. It doesn't mean that we need somebody to shoot us every moment of our lives to be a quote-unquote good man, good woman. It means what?
You get married.
You get married. Okay. I could see that after 33 years.
Keep your mind in hell and do not despair.
St. Solon, keep your mind in, St. Solon, keep your mind in hell and do not despair. What does that mean? means reaching out. It means building bridges. It means helping others, even the others we don't like, the others we don't want. It means not only physically doing things for them, it means praying for them. Okay, who are the them? The misfits of the world. It doesn't only mean praying for those we love. That, Jesus said that's easy, because you kind of do that naturally. It means praying for those we don't love. And I don't mean necessarily people in your own orbit that you don't like, because we all have those people. It means other people that we know that are in the world that are really rotten, nasty, that we have vile ideas toward, that we say so-and-so deserves a horrible, rotten death because of X, Y, or Z. Yeah, it means even praying for them, because, who's the misfit after all? Not a nice character by any means. Okay. Now I said I was going to mention another author. When I talked about the misfit saying, and I'm about to wrap it up for questions and stuff. When I talked about the misfit saying that he wasn't there, you can't say he didn't, and I said, the misfit wants to believe. An English author named William Nicholson, okay, who you might be familiar with, even though you're not familiar with his name, because probably everybody in here has seen the film Gladiator, and probably everybody in here, or many of you, have seen the film in a play it was based upon, Shadowlands, about C.S. Lewis and his wife, Joy Davidman. That play was written by William Nicholson, single-handedly. Okay? He is as he calls himself, a lapsed Catholic. That is, he was raised Catholic. He used to be really staunch Catholic, and sometime in his mid-20s, he had some kind of experience, and he no longer believes. Okay? Co-writer of Gladiator. And if you watch Shadowlands and watch Gladiator, within a week or so, there are some eerie parallels. Okay? And I don't just mean the Shadowlands scene at the end where he goes back off to his wife and he dies and stuff. Nicholson's written a couple of series of books kind of for young adults and adults. And the idea comes through so clearly in those that here is somebody who, one, believes in transcendence, but not necessarily a transcendent God, but who wants there to be a transcendent loving God. It just comes through so clear in his works, but it's like, I just can't buy the whole ball of wax. Okay? Just thought I'd throw that out. Okay, questions? Comments? So, Tom, did that answer any of your questions?
Made it a lot more sensible.
Okay. Yes?
Hold on.
Oh, we have a mic. This reminds me of the line in Princess Bride. Remember, this is for posterity, so be clear.
I just wanted, could you comment on, I just wonder, by her, she's kind of trying to evangelize him by telling him he's good. She's trying to reach for the goodness in him. Is the author commenting on the way the church tries to evangelize? Like particularly now, saying it's all good.
Oh,
and
wow.
we can just ignore that. Like if we just ignore the evil, it won't have a hold on us. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Maybe that was before or after her time.
But it's definitely after her time, I think.
Okay.
But I think I disagree with the premise that she is trying to evangelize him, saying, like Luke says to his father in the third Star Wars film, there is still good in you, Father. I can feel it. I don't think she's saying that. I think she's saying, you come from good people. I am good people. Good people don't kill each other. Don't kill me. I think that.
Like she's.
Oh yeah. I think she's entirely prejudiced, and I don't mean racially prejudiced. I mean class, at the minimum, class prejudice. She sees herself as being better than others.
Because he has good teeth. Because doesn't it mention he's got
He's got great teeth. Yeah, I mean, he's,
The other thing I wanted to ask is, does he have to perpetrate evil to feel alive? You know, how he can't remember what he's done? Is that why it brings him pleasure to do awful things so he can,
yes.
he can kind of feel that he's alive?
Yes. I mean, that's part of the idea. One second. That's part of the idea in the existential idea of authenticating your existence. It's this notion that this is where existentialism is so screwy. Because no person has ultimate meaning. Because we're not made in the image of anything. Take that back. We're made in the image of slime. Because we arose from slime and we will eventually go back to slime. Whether we individually when we die or humanity as a species gets overcome by something else. We're nothing but a 14.4 billion cosmic accident, essentially. And this is before, existentialists knew about the date of the universe according to Big Bang and all that kind of stuff. But what they essentially teach is, even though your existence has no meaning, you can, and two different terms are used, you can validate or authenticate it. Either term means the same, okay? And that is, you can kind of give a temporary meaning while you're here so that when you go, others will know you've been here. I just watched last night. Actually brought tears to my eyes because there's one character in it who's suffering from essentially dementia or Alzheimer's. My mom died of Alzheimer's 2.5 years ago. Coco. It's a Disney film. Set in Mexico, Day of the Dead kind of thing. And it's all about, when somebody dies, they go off to the other world, they go off to the afterlife. And if they are not remembered here, they eventually disappear there. Totally disappear. And being remembered here means, at the celebration of the Day of the Dead, having your picture up on the family kind of altar, and you bring kind of, I can't think of the right word, it starts with a V, votives and offerings to that person, etc., etc. But if you're forgotten here, if nobody remembers here, you disappear forever. And the whole movie's about remembering somebody. Well, why is that so important? Well, because if there's nothing else, then this is everything. And this is why, pagan Germanic culture, pagan Germanic mythology, the most important thing for a warrior is fame. It's the only way you live on. Because there's no real afterlife. Yeah, pagan Germanic warrior can go to Valhalla and play around with Brunhilde and the other, Valkyries in Valhalla until Ragnarok and the end of the world. But then Ragnarok's going to come. And according to most versions of the German myth, the forces of evil will win. And all the forces of good lose. And then that's it. You don't go on anymore. So I think that's the idea that O'Connor is trying to get at, is this is the predicament. That she says to be a conscious Catholic really means to understand that the world is both a burden and it's something that's got to be cherished. Because the burden part is there are people who live their lives this way. I mean, what's the number one or number two cause of death of teenagers? Suicide. Yeah, it's suicide. Okay. Didn't used to be 30, 40, 50 years ago. So there's, meaninglessness is creeping. Got to, hello, there we are.
is O'Connor saying that the misfit knows that all of that is a lie? When he talks about not remembering what he's done, he's always talking about they didn't have the papers.
They don't have my
papers. He doesn't have any proof of anything, but then there is proof. Like she reaches out to touch him, and so he has to obliterate the truth. So he's like willfully, determinedly ignorant, because that's the only self-protection he has.
Could be. Because, what are his two options? Either total belief without proof, or the only pleasure in life, excuse me, the only pleasure in life is meanness. And that's why, this is one of the quote-unquote, quote, and my understanding of this is based upon my reading years and years and years ago of Francis Schaeffer. Okay? Big Schaeffer head, like Deadhead. Big Schaeffer head. And what Schaeffer, said about existential, I read a lot of existential texts on my own too in my 20s because I was just weird that way. And Schaeffer makes the point, as do the existentialists themselves, it doesn't matter what you do. You can be Mother Teresa, and the world knows Mother Teresa lived because she lived her life doing what for 50 years? Serving the poor, serving the outcast, serving the despised, okay? Or you can be Joseph Stalin, and you could be the one killing the poor, killing the outcast, killing the despised, and 60 million Russians. It doesn't matter, because ethically, morally, there's no difference in the existential system. Why? Because there is no absolute morality. There's no basis for saying this one is morally better than this one. Tom earlier asked me about deconstruction. This idea that you can make a text mean essentially whatever you want it to mean, which is a gross oversimplification. But the idea, and it's part of postmodernism, the idea there's no truth, or all truth is relative. In almost every class I teach, and this is mind-blowing. It's even more mind-blowing now than it was 25 years ago when I started. I'll go into a class and we'll start off with a discussion, and I'll talk about quote-unquote truth and standards or systems of morality. And 90% of students, probably 90% of students will tend to say, what's right for me may not be right for somebody else. What's wrong for me may not be wrong for somebody else. What's right for our country may not be right for another country. If we could all just kind of live to get along and let each person do what they want. My rights extend as far as my arm, and your rights extend just before my fist touches your face, kind of a thing. And can't we just, all do our own thing? I'm like, well, that's a nice idea. So Hitler was right. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, you just said that what we do may not be right for somebody else, and what somebody else may do may not be right for us. So what Hitler did was right. Well, how do you figure? Well, because for what Hitler said the Germans needed at that time, it was right for them. How can I say it was wrong if I don't have a standard that I can set up against it? Well, but that's just crazy because he's talking about killing Jews. So, what's so bad about killing Jews? And I just keep doing that until they get into these little boxes like this. And they're like, well, it's not fair. So where does this notion of fairness come from? And they're like, well, that's a stupid question. Everybody has a notion of fairness. Oh, so there is a standard. The standard is fairness. Now that you've admitted there's a standard, now we need to start filling in what fair means. Fair for whom, etc. Okay? And usually at the end of, if not that particular classroom, the end of the semester, I'll go from 90% saying truth is absolutely relative. Notice the kind of paradox there. Absolutely relative to maybe 85% having that. 5% will go, you really made me think for the first time. It's like, okay, if there'd been exactly. If there'd been somebody to shoot you every day of your life, because that's what it comes down to. It comes down to mentally shooting them because they've never been confronted with an idea like this. Well, I shouldn't go this far, but many of them have never been confronted with an idea, so they haven't had to, think through something.
I just want to go back to what the misfit says about. He blames Jesus. He says that's
Jesus throwing everything off.
Yeah, and so there he's sort of maybe on the surface take that universally, but I had a question about if he's blaming Jesus for how he's turned out and his complete confusion and misunderstanding about what Jesus was and Jesus hanging out with people he wasn't supposed to hang out with, forgiving people he wasn't supposed to forgive, and making those things not fit like they're supposed to fit. And if that's just completely thrown him for a loop. And so, yeah, he might as well kill as do good deeds. And
yeah.
So you have comments about what he says there, and is that a general statement, do you think, or is that a statement about himself and how he's turned out?
I think it's both, actually. I think it's a general statement. I mean, if you take that Jesus throwing everything off, he threw everything off balance. Why? Go back to C.S. Lewis's statement. He either is who he says he is, the Son of God, which creates all kinds of issues that one then intellectually has to address, or he's a madman. Lewis actually gives three options. Or he's a madman, or he's a loony on the level of someone who thinks he's a poached egg. It's one of those three. He cannot, Lewis argues, he cannot be, this great, wise, moral teacher. He can't be like Buddha. Why? Because Buddha never said, I'm God. Jesus did. Muhammad never said, I'm God. Jesus did. I'm the prophet of God. Not God, because modern day Muslims would kill him for saying that, because Allah is so transcendent. There's no immanence there. But by Jesus saying, I am God, okay, he threw everything off balance. He took the world that was, I'll use a phrase, swimming along nicely until he entered the picture. That is, you had, civilizations rise and fall. People are rotten. Some people were good, etc. But, cyclical nature of history. It just kind of came and went. And then Jesus came. Jesus coming is what for history? It's the linchpin. The door opens how? Because it's got hinges. Jesus is the hinge. The doors don't open without Jesus. That's why I am the way, the truth, and the life. You don't get the way without the door opening. So he threw everything off balance by, take the image of a seesaw, teeter-totter. Prior to Jesus, the seesaw kind of went back and forth, right? You have the ancient Sumerians, they're in control. Then you have the Egyptians, they're in control. Then you have the Greeks, they're in control. Then you have the Romans, they're in control. Okay? And the seesaw tips up and down. And then Jesus comes in. And what is he? He's God. Does that mean he sits on and all the others, do this kind of thing? Well, not really, because he doesn't come how the Israelites expect him to come. How do they expect him to come? Kind of, yeah. But the image of like Thor. They expect him to come fully armed and ready to inaugurate the eternal kingdom of David. Okay? But that's not the kind of king he is. But he comes And what does he do? What are they expecting?
Be delivered from the Romans.
To be delivered? How? Physically. They're expecting not a turn the other cheek. They're expecting a give me the other cheek. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Kill or be killed. I don't Tom likes movies. The line in The Untouchables. You hurt one of ours, we hurt 5 of yours. You hurt 5 of ours, we killed 10 of yours. That's what they were expecting. He doesn't do that. What's he do? He throws everything off. Do good to those who do evil to you. How does that make any sense? I mean, for a lot of us, we still have, I'll be honest, have real problems with that at times. Because living in this body, in this world, my natural, the old man reaction is, oh yeah, buddy? Rather than, okay. So that's the general. The personal is, I think the misfit looks at Jesus and he knows that because it's clear. This guy's biblically literate. Okay? And he knows what Jesus is supposed to have done. Notice I put supposed to have done. But he doesn't have what? He doesn't have the papers. He
still says he threw everything off.
Yeah.
So even though is he saying if he had the papers then it would be good, or?
I think he's saying if he had the proof, then he would follow him. But he doesn't. Unless, pretend this is the Bible, unless you consider this the proof. What's the problem? Well, it's 2,000 years old for one thing. He didn't write it. He didn't. What does the misfit want? He wants what Thomas wanted. I have to see it with my own eyes. And I think, and I could be way out on that limb here. I could be magnificently wrong. When the grandmother says, you're one of my babies, that's the proof. Why? Because she's expressing love there. For whom? A mass murderer. That's scratching my head.
Yeah, then he's supposed to trigger them.
Yeah, because he doesn't see that as proof. For him, that's not proof.
Or it is, and he just doesn't want to know.
Or it is, and he doesn't want to accept it.
Because that would mean he would have to do it also.
It's the parable of Lazarus.
Lazarus and the rich man?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
One thing that interests me about this story is the idea, which seems to be sort of an attempt to answer sort of, like you said, the existentialist question of its time, of how to perceive sort of the immanence of our to live in the moment of our existence. And one of the things there is the idea that she would have been good. There have been somebody to shoot her there every moment of her life. Now, this is a motif that we see in literature in other places, and I think even some of the church fathers talk about the importance of contemplating the moment of our death as sort of a way of achieving that. From a literary point of view, one of my favorite G.K. Chesterton novels that I go to sometimes is the novel Man Alive. Are you familiar with that one? Well, in this particular story, basically it's also I think kind of an attempt to wrestle with this modern nihilism. And you've got a gentleman, I think his name is Innocent Smith, if I remember, and he corpulent man wearing a green suit, so very much Chesterton's alter ego. And he goes, and he's a crack shot in college. He's like on the shooting team. And we find that through the course of his life, he goes around shooting people. Not killing them, but making them think he's going to kill them. So I guess since you're not familiar with the story, you can't answer this question. I was on the one one hand wondering if there was some thinking, and if you knew perhaps O'Connor may have been familiar with this story and been replicating the idea. But I always kind of wondered, is that sort of the idea of we could sort of perceive a Catholic version of the misfit going around and shooting life into people. That's the term that they use. I wonder if you had.
Yeah, I mentioned Thoreau, and Thoreau says the mass of humanity goes around living lives of quiet desperation, and they are only half awake. And he talks about people living to work. And he goes through the ritual, they get up, they eat, they go to work, they come home, they eat, they go to bed, they get up, and they don't think. And that's why he says, he went off to the woods. Why? Because he wanted to live life deliberately. He wanted to suck all the marrow out of life. That is, to live life deliberately. He says he wanted to look it in the face. He wanted to confront it. It's kind of like I mentioned Dylan Thomas. Dylan Thomas's, short poem, Do Not Grow Gentle into That Good Night. It's this idea of confronting what she describes in another letter, utter reality. Well, in one of Charles Williams's novels, that utter reality is the abyss of death. And it's confronting, it's standing and looking into death. And that is the only thing that wakes some people up, that gets them to see the importance of life. Okay? So I think there's that element. There is a branch of existentialism, Christian existentialism, that Schaeffer, towards the end of his life, kind of talked about, because it was this idea of living moment by moment. One of the great hymns of the Western Church, Great is Thy Faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. You could translate that morning by morning, moment by moment. I mean, it's a paraphrase of Lamentations, but it's every minute of every hour of life. This idea, I think Jason wants the microphone, of Tom?
No, I think Shelley's got it.
Oh, okay.
Ladies first.
My wife taught me that.
Of confronting that aspect of life. Did that answer? Go ahead.
So I was wondering, and if maybe I was reading too much into it, but it seems to me that there is a change in the misfit, because but into the conversation he says that line, there's no pleasure but meanness. Mm-hmm. And then in the next section, it seems like his existentialism is falling apart, because he says, if I had been there, I would have known, and I wouldn't be like I am now. So it seems like he is appealing to a standard of goodness that is at odds with his. It doesn't matter, good or bad, what I do. Obviously, he's getting to a point where he's seeing that he's not what he should do. And then the very last line is when he responds to Bobby Lee, he says, there is no pleasure in this life.
It's no real pleasure in life.
There is no real, there's a change in him within those 3 paragraphs.
Well, but, if you take that no pleasure but meanness, and his voice had almost become a snarl, the old lady then says, but maybe he didn't raise the dead. Now, she's been the one asserting, just pray to Jesus and Jesus will help you. And he causes her to second guess that. He follows that up with, I wasn't there, so I can't say he didn't. Notice, there's the possibility he did. He admits that. but he doesn't know. He wants proof. He wants knowledge. Okay? So no pleasure in meanness, he wasn't there, so I don't know. It's no real pleasure in life. His final word, which is the final sentence of the short story, says what about life?
It's meaningless.
Yeah, it's not pleasure, joy. It's meaningless. There's no meaning in life. That's why he had to shoot her.
Why?
What did she do? What did she say? She gave him meaning by saying, you're one of my babies. You're one of my babies. You're one of my own children. Boom! He couldn't accept that. That doesn't fit into his cognitive sphere of life. Because he thinks of people how? Nothing but meanness. I mean, think of ad slogans. For those of you who are old enough, go back 30 years or 40 years. You know, what was it? Miller said, you only go out, or was it Bud? You only go out once in life.
Have all the gusto.
Go for the gusto. Okay? Grab all you can. What does that mean? It means screw everybody else. Look out for number one. Okay? He's applying to everybody else his mentality. There's no pleasure but meanness. In other words, not do unto others what you would have them do unto you. Do unto others before they do unto you. That's his motto. Okay?
In the passage where, and others have already alluded to it, but it made me think of something else. I wonder what you thought about this. When he says, when the misfit says, Jesus was the only one that ever raised the dead, and he shouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
He's thrown everything off balance. If he did what he said, then it's nothing for you to do but throw everything away to follow him. And if he didn't, then it's nothing for you to do but enjoy the few minutes you've got the best way you can. It made me think of the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 when he said, if Christ be not raised from the dead, then eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And yet for him, pleasure is not eat, drink, and be merry. He says there's no pleasure but meanness. So for him, pleasure is meanness. That's what he gets his thrills out of, his murder. And it also then made me kind of think back to earlier in the book when he said, Daddy said, oh, wait a minute. My daddy said, I was a different breed of dog from my brothers and sisters. And so his father recognized that this one particular child of his was different from the rest of them. And that made me think of the character in Steinbeck's East of Eden, Kathy Ames, who Steinbeck referred to as a psychic monster or a malformed soul. This woman who burned her parents' house down with her parents in it, and then has the twins of Adam Ames, and then or Adam Trask, and then goes off to run a whorehouse and so on. It almost seems like Flannery O'Connor is sort of fond of using what we would call freaks, these weirdos, but then she sort of extrapolates back from the extremity of the freaks, what we would call the freaks and the weirdos, these people who they can't take pleasure in eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow I die. For them, taking pleasure is taking these perfect strangers out into the woods and shooting them down. Men, women, babies, children, the whole nine. That's what he gets his jollies off of. And so I'm sort of...
Well, there's a difference, because St. Paul's operating, when he says that, St. Paul's operating within a Greek system of belief. That is, when he says eat, marry, and die, he's quoting there, if I remember right, Epicurus.
Right.
Okay? The misfit's not in that system anymore. Because in that system, in the Epicurean system, and even in the Stoic system, there was still meaning to life. Okay? The highest good, the summum bonum, was what you sought. Why? To live a virtuous, ethical life. Not because they thought you went off to be with God in heaven, but because that is the nature of humanity. To reach for the highest, to be ennobled, to become better than what we are. Well, by the mid-20th century, that idea is gone. That used to be the idea behind the university. That is not the idea behind a modern American university at all. Hasn't been, at least for the last 25 years. Okay? So when he mentions his father, and his father says he's different than his brothers and sisters, yes. I mean, O'Connor is telling us there, the misfit is a misfit. Mm-hmm. He doesn't belong. Okay? He is a sociopath.
Was he a psychic monster and a malformed soul?
Yeah. She says, another letter, okay, talking about exaggeration and distortion. Because one of the complaints leveled against her by critics is, man, you populate your story with freaks and grotesque characters. Well, the grotesque is a characteristic of Southern fiction. Read anything by William Faulkner, read Walker Percy, okay, read Eudora Welty, read Streetcar Named Desire, Tennessee Williams, okay, read Flannery O'Connor, and they're all populated with grotesque characters. She says, she does that because distortion is an instrument. Exaggeration has a purpose. The whole structure of the story or novel has been made in what it is because of belief. Why does she do that? Because of who her audience is. If you read the letters, she says in one of them, I believe, too, there is only one reality, and that is the end of it. But the term Christian realism has become necessary for me, perhaps in a purely academic way, because I find myself in a world where everybody has his compartment, their box, puts you in yours, that is, Republican, conservative, Christian, atheist, whatever, Democrat, etc., shuts the door and departs. That is, I label you, and then I don't have to do what?
Deal with you.
I don't have to deal with you. I don't have to interact. I don't have to understand. I don't have to empathize, etc. One of the awful things about writing when you are a Christian is that for you, the ultimate reality is the incarnation. That's how Jesus thrown everything off balance. He became. God entered the world. Okay? Which is what St. Paul says, this is the stumbling block for the Greeks. This is moronic to them. Okay? Muslims don't really, how did God come? That besmirches the very notion of Allah, etc. The present reality is the incarnation, and nobody believes in the incarnation. That is, in the mid-50s, she's saying, modern American society pays lip service to the incarnation. We're not any better in 2018, right? Okay. Then she says, pardon?
Worse.
Yeah, we're worse. And that is, she says, nobody in your audience believes it. Well, who is her audience? My audience are the people who think God is dead. She writes that, I think, before John A.T. Robinson and Paul Tillich launch the Death of God movement in theology. Nietzsche was the one who launches it because he said, God is dead and we have killed him. Why? Because we outgrew our need for him. Okay? But she's saying her audience, because who's she writing for? She's not writing for Christianity Today. She's writing for Sewanee Review, Partisan Review, New Yorker, quote unquote, serious, works of literary intelligence, blah, 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 blah. Okay? Her audience is a bunch of atheists. So, she says, these are the people I'm conscious writing for. So, when she needs to shock somebody out of their skin, pull the trigger, she has to do what? She has to use grotesque, shocking images. I kept coming back to, they're down in the gulch, green over here, wall over here, and you look up ahead and all you see is blue. Symbolism? baptism. Because what happens? They go down and they die. That's the first part of baptism, right? What's the second part?
That's right.
The rising again. Do they rise? Not within the story. Okay. But it is a baptism into death for all the major characters. Question? Did I answer your...
After a manner.
Okay. We can come back to it.
Yeah, I've got to follow up. There.
Okay.
First, I just want to thank you. Flannery O'Connor sometimes makes sense, but often does not. And you've brought, it's just delightful to hear you walk through all the elements. She was an amazing woman, and the stories I hear about her, not just the letters and so forth, but she likes to throw people off. You know, when she was interviewed once by someone saying, "How can you believe that the Eucharist is real?" And her response was, "Well, if it's not real, hell with it." Her grotesqueness, as you describe it, is the way that it throws things off for us to think. My question is, when I read the story and I didn't understand nearly as much as I do now, the only thing that came to mind as he went 3 times is he couldn't forgive himself.
For what he'd done? For what he was?
He is a misfit. He couldn't understand it. He couldn't make sense of it. It was too much.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that's, you know, his raising the question about where was it? He made the comment does it seem right to you, lady, that one is punished a heap, another ain't punished at all? I think is key to that.
You think what?
He asked the question, does it seem right to you, lady, that one is punished a heap and another ain't punished at all?
What did you say?
I think that's the importance of that question. He is saying, where's the justice in the world?
Where's the justice?
It's the problem of evil, which can't be, I would argue, rationally answered. C.S. Lewis tried Problem of Pain fairly early in his apologetic career. And about 12 or so years later, when he wrote his final novel, I think he writes his final novel because Lewis came to a conclusion, reason came to the right conclusion, reason can only get us so far. And it took him a long time to realize that because he was such a rationalist. I mean, it took him a hard time to reconcile faith and reason because he tried to argue for the proof. He had a famous Oxford debate with a Catholic theologian / philosopher named Elizabeth Anscombe about the proof for God's existence. Lewis thought she cleaned the floor with him. She thought he would. Go figure. Okay? He stopped writing apologetics after that debate. He never wrote another work of apologetics after that.
One more comment before we pass it on to the next question and answer request. Would you be willing to come back here again and talk to us about just an idea? Washington's farewell address.
Ooh. Yeah, I'd consider that.
I think all of your references to students and understanding morality and where it comes from and how this republic was built, without getting too much into politics, just the essence of that farewell address.
Yeah, yeah, I'd love to. Give me enough warning.
This is just a side note about the emptiness of life and the lip service. You mentioned that people paid to Christianity in her time without really believing it. I was reminded of John Crow Ransom's book, God Without Thunder, which I think he wrote in 1927. And he said in that book that that was already the case, and that people had more or less basically adopted a scientist view of the world and were just swimming through what technology made available and had basically abandoned any true orthodox view of the faith, even though they make lip service.
Well, yeah, I mean, that tip, just about anything by T.S. Eliot, Bill Buckley's God Man at Yale in 1950, I want to say. Might have been 51. I would be very surprised if Flannery O'Connor would not have read Buckley's book. Being Catholic and in the South, she probably need all the quote-unquote, Catholic support she could get, because not a lot of Catholics in Milledgeville, Georgia, or in Savannah. So yeah, I think the lip service goes back long before even 1927. I mean, you could go back to the poem by Matthew Arnold that I mentioned, Dover Beach, written in 59, same year Origin of Species. I think that same year, or 10 years before. I always get those wrong. Because in that poem, Matthew Arnold talks about the sea of faith has dwindled. And he's talking about how faith in the mid-19th century is no longer as important. Why? Well, because we've had the Age of Enlightenment for almost 200 years. And we've had the industrial rise beginning in the beginning of the 19th century, late 18th century. So you have, modern technology and science and reason all ascending, taking their rightful place, so to speak, in history according to the progressive mindset. Which I was reading something completely off the top. To show the utter, and I don't mean to get into politics, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to, it is. The utter idiocy of Barack Obama's progressive idea of history, that history is ever marching forward, the 20th century is proof of the exact opposite. Because the 20th century, as I said, was supposed to be the progressive century. It was supposed to be the Christian century. It was supposed to be the century where we ended wars and all this kind of stuff. And what happened? Exactly. More lives lost in that century alone in war than in all other wars. I mean, that proves the mindset that history is ever progressing is just wrong. I saw somebody else.
I just wanted
to a couple things. There's actually a recording of Flannery O'Connor reading this story. I included in the link, which Tom sent, yeah.
I would highly, highly encourage you to listen to, because she has a wonderful, deep Southern drawl, and she also just delivers her points very perfectly.
And her wit.
Yes.
I mean, because when she reads the story, it's not how I read the story.
Yeah, it's laugh out loud funny, and you kind of feel bad about yourself a little bit. But that's part of that's part of what I like about her is, and this is kind of my comment, is that I've read a lot of things by her, and she has a habit of making you sympathize with the worst people in her story, and making you kind of think that the better people or the more upstanding people are the least likable, the least relatable. And I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning. She didn't believe. I mean, she did not have a rosy view of the world, but she also didn't believe anybody was wholly bad either.
Yeah, I agree with that. In her use of the grotesque and the freaks is also emblematic of her very deep faith. Because, as Christ says, who did he come for? He didn't come for the healthy. Who did he spend much of his time with? The lepers, the prostitutes, the tax collectors, the misfits of society. And so and that's one of the reasons I think when she reaches out, she's, if not symbolic, she's emblematic of the church. This is the church. This is who the church ought to reach to. And instead the church says what? No, we want only the people properly dressed, coming in. We don't want the people who smell. We don't want the people who live on the street. We want, we want to be respectable. And that describes the grandmother. Okay?
Yeah, and I'm sure she saw being in the 50s, in the South in the 50s, a lot of those church people support a lot of things that were really horrible towards people they didn't go to church with.
Well, I mean, 1953, it's a year before Brown versus Board of Education.
I was going to come back to a comment from earlier about whether or not the grandmother was evangelizing the misfit, and flip it the other way for a second. She's so lost from most of the story, and just to comment about where they are attempting to go when they go off the road, that she's led them on this totally wild goose chase to find this supposed hidden silver behind the supposed hidden door behind the supposed plantation in a totally different state. I mean, they're way off track, right? She's searching for something that is, not there, probably never was there. And so there's almost like, and a comment too about who her audience is. Yeah, maybe they're atheists, maybe they're only paying lip service to Christianity, but at the very least they're familiar with the story of the Good Samaritan, and this may be completely obvious, but in a way, the misfit is the Good Samaritan coming along the road and finding someone who needs help, and in a way offers her, he saves her in a way, gives her this moment of clarity, as you said earlier,
Yeah.
to say, oh, this is what I'm here for. Oh, I'm supposed to be helping all of my babies, right?
Yeah,
and so it's almost as if he offers her, not evangelizes her, but offers her a moment of meaning. And I wonder, I just want to comment personally, as I was reading the story, thought that was a brilliant tactic by O'Connor to use. I imagine because it's similar to the story of the Good Samaritan, I was still holding out hope naively as I was reading it that maybe these people were going to save them, because the story was set up that way. Here comes this car, this timely arrival of someone who's going to help them out of the ditch, and as you were mentioning before, that's how she plays on her audience. That's how she makes it. That's her shock value, that the Good Samaritan is actually that guy. But maybe not.
The woman that she writes the letters to, she makes it, if you read that page that the letters are on, she talks about the woman feels drawn to the church, but she doesn't want to be. She feels like she's being seduced. Okay? And in one of her responses to her, O'Connor writes, in the face of anyone's experience, someone like myself who has had almost no experience must be humble. I will never have the experience of the convert, or of the one who fails to be converted, or even in all probability of the formidable sinner. But your effort not to be seduced by the church moves me greatly. God permits it, that is, permits your effort not to be seduced. For some reason, though it is the devil's greatest work of hallucination. So God permits it, but it's the devil's work. Okay? And then she talks about a priest who told somebody not to come into the church until he felt it would be an enlargement of his freedom. Don't come into the church unless you think by coming into the church you will not be curtailed by laws and rules, thou shalt nots, but you will be freed. Why? Because what did St. Paul say? It's in Christ we get our freedom. So, this is what you are doing, and you are right. That is, the person she's writing to, it's like, I don't want to be sucked in. I'm backing off. She says, you're doing the right thing. Notice how opposite that is to what so many Christians today would say. No, come on, this is the church for you. No, you don't want to go over to those Methodists. You want to come here to our church, This is what you are doing, and you are right. But do not make your feeling of the voluptuous, I love this language, of the voluptuous, seductive powers of the church into a hard shell to protect yourself from her. See, I think that's what the misfit has done. He's built a shell. The box that he talks about, part of it's self-imposed. We all do this, right? We put up walls. Why? Been burned too many times. Okay? Maybe his burning began at home when his daddy said, "You ain't like the rest of them kids, boy. You're a freak." Well, gee, thanks, Daddy. I suppose it is like marriage, that when you get into it, you find it is the beginning, not the end of the struggle to make love work. Man, that ought to be required reading for every couple thinking about marriage. Because, after all, today it's all about love. Love is all you need. It will pay the bills. It will make everyone happy. When I do my Brit-Lit 1 course, and I do some of Shakespeare's sonnets, I always do sonnet 116. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not, and he goes on and he talks about love. And I'm one of these old-fashioned weirdos, and I think this sonnet is actually, and I'm probably completely wrong, Shakespeare telling us what Shakespeare, really thinks love is. Because he says love is an ever-fixed mark that does not move when the remover moves. What does that mean? It doesn't move when the other one moves. If Ted, me, loves my wife Karen, and Karen falls in love with somebody else and leaves, I don't say, "Oh yeah, well, you," and according to Shakespeare's sonnet, Ted still loves. How long? Until the time of death. It is an ever-fixed mark, he says. It is like the star whose height's unknown, the pole star, and yet looks down on tempests. The rocks, the waves, 33 years, the ups and downs, the making love work that she talks about. Okay? Again, entering the church, she says, is like this. Because what happens with all too many quote-unquote converts to Christianity? They enter the quote-unquote church, whatever the church is, and what do they think? Because they're all full of the love of Jesus and everybody else, and everything's wonderful, and it's so beautiful, and it's so moving, and then they're there, and they have somebody sit next to them who stinks, or somebody stands in front of them and they don't sing well, or somebody with their child behind them, and they're kicking the pew. And what do they come to discover? Church is just like everywhere else. In fact, if anything, it's worse than everywhere else because sinners congregate there. That's why St. John Chrysostom said the church is a hospital, not a courtroom. It's where you go for healing. It's not where you go for perfection. Try Disneyland. I don't know where you go for perfection. You were going to follow? No,
I think
Anne Marie, sorry.
I think I have a follow-up stuff, but I don't want to.
Well, go ahead, and I'll go after you.
Okay. I'm not quite sure the question on this. I didn't connect the timing until you mentioned the progressivist view of history. I just looked it up. I realized, and I will not say his name right, but
Teilhard de Chardin.
Okay. Was that not what? I mean, he was within the Catholic Church, right? That was.
Yeah.
Am I misunderstanding? I mean, I'm just wondering if was there any connection there in terms of? I mean, that I didn't realize he was doing for a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't spent a lot of time.
Yeah, he with, Schweitzer wasn't Catholic, but Albert Schweitzer, had the same kind of idea, the perfectibility of humanity. Okay, Paul Tillich, another Protestant theologian, but Tillich talked about God as being the ground of all being. Why? Because that's essentially what Kierkegaard, one of the ways Kierkegaard described God. But Kierkegaard's ground of all being, the source of all being, it was more personal. I mean, Kierkegaard was still within the kind of the Trinitarian perspective. Tillich's ideas were not so much. Teilhard de Chardin's were kind of, is this extreme, let's say, Christian humanism. Christian, some would say, in name only. Kind of, God is this purposive force that is moving humanity ever onward and upward. If you're familiar with it, it's the same kind of language that C.S. Lewis puts in the mouth of the unman in Paralandra. The unman is Satan. Okay? I mean, Lewis was dealing with that in 1942, before a lot of these ideas were really kind of hitting the mainstream. But yeah, does that kind of... I understand.
In the part of the story where the grandma pleads, I know you're a good man. You're not a bit common. No, I ain't a good man, the misfit said after a second, as if he considered her statement carefully. Mm-hmm. But I ain't the worst in the world either. Any Christian here who has pleaded with an unbeliever in a conversation in a coffee shop or on a subway or anywhere about the claims of the gospel, the claims of Christianity, that they're under God's wrath and condemnation and that they must humble themselves, confess their sins, and if so, receive God's mercy and grace through Jesus Christ, that often one of the most common things that you will hear an unbeliever say is, either I'm not that bad, or they compare themselves to somebody they know is worse.
Right.
And so that's always kind of the out dodge, so to speak, is, well, I'm not perfect, but I'm not as bad as this guy I know down the road that did X, Y, and Z. And it seems like even here we have the misfit who is, the psychic monster and the malformed soul, as Steinbeck said of Kathy Ames. He's still pleading the same argument that I'm not a good man, but I'm not as bad as some, and that kind of seems to be kind of the argument or the plead that the unbeliever, that the non-Christian will often go back to, which then made me think of where you started your talk, or at least in the beginning of your talk, which I thought was right on, when they said to Jesus, good teacher, and he immediately stopped, whoa, wait a minute, why do you call me good? There is no one good but God. And we think about what goodness is. Mm-hmm. That, as a matter of fact, talking about the grotesque figures, I think one of the things O'Connor is getting at is you have this psychic monster, this malformed soul in this story, the misfit, but we're actually not that far from the psychic monster and the malformed soul. We're not as far down the line as the psychic monster and the malformed soul, but we are of the same piece as him, and that, as a matter of fact, there is no good but from God. And it made me think of the psalmist's reflections in Psalm 73, where he muses, "Whom have I in heaven but you? And there is nothing on earth I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. For behold, those who are far from you shall perish. You put an end to everyone who is unfaithful to you. But for me it is good to be near God. I have made the Lord God my refuge, that I may tell of all your works." And so the psalmist is there not pleading his own righteousness or his own goodness, but is saying that God is everything to me, and that to be near him is the absolute goodness for me.
Yeah, I mean, look at Psalm 50. Create in me a clean heart. I mean, how does he begin? Have mercy on me. I mean, he's saying there, I'm not a good man.
Right.
And he concludes, establish me with a guiding spirit. I mean, then shall I teach. So, starts off, I'm a sinner. You and I do all these things kind of together, synergy. Then I will teach transgressors their way. You know, I will convert the impious. Well, the impious here haven't been converted. Okay? Here's a question for you. In most stories, you have a protagonist and an antagonist. The protagonist, the chief sufferer. The antagonist, the person who opposes the chief sufferer. The protagonist, the person who suffers the most. Usually, the person we are meant to identify with. Who's the protagonist in here?
The misfit.
Is it the misfit? Or is it the grandmother?
I think it's the misfit.
It's the misfit, perhaps because, again, we're not all too far from the psychic monster and the malformed soul, as Steinbeck said. I mean, when we look at somebody who's utterly depraved, whether we look at a Jeffrey Dahmer or these rapists and these murderers and so on, we know the evil and the corruption and the wickedness that lies within our own breast, and that if God isn't merciful, we would carry out those same evil deeds as well.
Well, I mean, what does Christ say? You know, if you've thought it, it's out of the heart, out of the mind, come the thoughts, come that. You know, some people say, "Oh yeah, there's a huge bridge between me." I'll often do this thing, and I'll tell my students, there's a very fine line between me and the Gestapo. Mm-hmm. I could be a member of the Gestapo tomorrow, based upon things I've ruminated about before. Does that mean I'm sitting there at home and I'm contemplating that? No, it just means, like Lewis said, if you get in touch with the heart, which Jeremiah said is what?
Desperately wicked and evil beyond all.
Exactly, okay? That's why David says, create in me a clean heart, O God. If I am aware of that, then what? Then I know. Then I at least have the ability or the opportunity to try to put on the brakes. Okay? The misfit is saying, the hell with the brakes. There's no pleasure in life. Period. Only meanness. Why? Because his experience has been, according to him, meanness. His understanding of God is what? The cosmic sadist. Why, he asks, does it seem right to you that one is punished a heap and another ain't punished at all? That's his question.
Well, and of course, that overlooks final judgment.
Sure,
right?
sure.
No one gets away with anything.
Sure, but he's not talking. He's talking here. He's talking, why do I get all kinds of punishment? And it's almost like he's saying, meanwhile, John over there, who I know has done a heck of a lot worse than I have, he's never been any time in the pen. He's wrestling with that basic question. And because the answer he has received hasn't satisfied him, boom! Then I'm just going to go be a mean, rotten SOB until what? Until punishment catches up. He's essentially saying, I'm going to do the crimes I've already been punished enough for that I haven't done. He's saying, my life is already so bad. I've not done enough to merit the punishment I received, so I'm going to catch up. If God's the great judge, then I'm going to give him something to judge me on.
Oh, so you think that he says that he doesn't think he's gotten enough?
Yeah, I think I don't mean it that way. I think he is saying that he has been punished excessively.
Right.
And so he is going to earn what he's already been punished for. Yeah, he's going to make sure when that judgment comes, the paper will go on one side of the scale, and his actions will be over here because he's already been punished. He's thinking, I'm already essentially damned. Well, if I'm already damned, then I'm going to damn well enjoy it, essentially, even though there's no
Well,
pleasure.
the Catholic side of me says the protagonist is the grandmother.
Okay?
Because she's being married. And she has this moment of clarity. And that's what redeems the misfit. And the blue sky is married.
Well, I mean, he always refers to her as lady. He always refers to her as lady. He doesn't refer to her. He does once or twice as ma'am. It's lady to her. To Bailey's wife, it's usually ma'am. Well, there's a difference between lady and ma'am. Mary is usually our lady, not ma'am. Ma'am's a little too colloquial for it, Any other questions?
Going once? We'll pass our bedtime.
I think everybody's inside asleep.
Late man. All right.
Thank you all.
Very good.